We have been listening to Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi and the top Democrats on each of the relevant committees on this historic day, Mueller Day, in Washington. The Speaker there tamping down questions about impeachment, while her committee chairs were vigorous on what they think Mueller's testimony meant and what they'll continue to do. We have a big show, including a breakdown in a moment on some of the most important things that Bob Mueller testified, breaking his silence, testifying under oath today for the first time about the Russia probe. But given that press conference, I want to bring in right now former U.S. Attorney Joyce Vance and former federal prosecutor John Flannery. Before I get into the rest of it, what was important to you about that press conference?
This conference gave us a roadmap for where Democrats are headed, and that's into court on Friday, seeking to subpoena grand jury or get the court to order the release of grand jury information, but also to issue a subpoena to Don McGahn. And if he comes into court and comes into Congress and tells the story to the public that he apparently told in the Mueller report, that could be the breakaway moment.
I see the duel between Nadler and Pelosi. Nadler's been taking a stronger turn toward impeachment. Pelosi is still giving the buzzkill. I think the drift is toward Nadler, and it can't happen soon enough for the public, for the base, and for the independents and others who saw what happened today at the hearings.
And as you say, watching that, you could see some of the daylight there between the questions that the press were most interested in. What are the stakes? What's the outcome of this? Chairman Nadler, who did cast a vote for impeachment last week, and Speaker Pelosi. So we wanted to give everyone a little context for that. And now turn to the reset tonight, the most important news in America on this special edition of The Beat. Former special counsel Mueller making history here in Washington today, taking a turn that, remember, he'd long resisted, from prosecutor to witness, addressing Congress and the nation about ongoing Russian meddling, the president's, quote, unpatriotic actions, and Mr. Mueller's belief that the rules prevent him from ruling and forming a public judgment on Trump's criminal culpability for obstruction or this question of impeachment. So let me show you exactly what the highlights were. On the substance, today was split between two different committees, Judiciary and Intelligence, which made for two very different prisms, one about the law, the other about national security. And Mueller began the day carefully, taking those legal questions on obstruction, but often deflecting and parrying them. All told, we counted here at NBC, he declined to answer 198 questions today. And when the legal questions boiled down to, is President Trump a crook? Bob Mueller would answer, it's not for him to say. When those security questions, particularly in the second hearing, boiled down to, should the president act better than a crook? Mueller's answer was, under oath and in public today to America, yes, he should. If you listen closely, when Mueller was asked direct questions about this criminal evidence on Trump, like did he interfere with the probe, he did say yes. In fact, some of the most important answers today were those short confirmations from fact-checking Trump to stating under oath that welcoming Russia's meddling is unpatriotic.
Well, your investigation is not a witch hunt, is it?
It is not a witch hunt.
When the president said the Russian interference was a hoax, that was false, wasn't it?
True.
Your investigation found evidence that Russia wanted to help Trump win the election, right?
That would be accurate.
Knowingly accepting foreign assistance during a presidential campaign is an unethical thing to do.
And a crime.
We can agree that it's also unpatriotic.
True.
We should hold our elected officials to a standard higher than mere avoidance of criminality, shouldn't we?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. If you listen closely, what you heard there was Bob Mueller forming a judgment of Donald Trump, and it was not a positive one. So as we dig into the substance tonight on what is one of the most momentous days of this era, consider this next thing we learned. After all the people indicted or convicted of obstructing this probe and lying to the feds, including several Trump advisors, note what I'm about to show you. Today, you can hear Bob Mueller, for the first time, say in his own words under oath that Donald Trump followed the same path that those others were indicted for. Let me repeat before you see this. Bob Mueller referring to Donald Trump following that same illegal path, making false, untruthful statements to Mueller's investigators.
In fact, there were many questions that you asked the president that he simply didn't answer. Isn't that correct?
True.
And there were many answers that contradicted other evidence you had gathered during the investigation. Isn't that correct,
yes.
Director Mueller? Could you say, Director Mueller, that the president was credible?
I can't answer that question.
Director Mueller, isn't it fair to say that the president's written answers were not only inadequate and incomplete, his answers showed that he wasn't always being truthful?
I would say Generally.
Generally untruthful is worse than rarely, or what you'd want if you were any other normal non-president witness, which is a no. Mr. Mueller did not go beyond the limits that he set for himself, because they're not just laws. He said he wouldn't go beyond his report. Other prosecutors have. He told everyone he wouldn't go beyond his report, so everyone, including the press, was on notice. And Mr. Mueller, I want to be clear, and this is in fairness to the White House as well, Mr. Mueller never explicitly built up a case for impeachment today. But he did confirm serious evidence against the sitting president, and he confirmed DOJ can indict an ex-president.
But under DOJ, under Department of Justice policy, the president could be prosecuted for obstruction of justice crimes after he leaves office, is correct?
True.
True. And Mueller implored Americans to take Russia's ongoing attack seriously and dug into several other issues that, as I mentioned, we're going to get into methodically and substantively in this special coverage on The Beat tonight. But now I want to bring back in two of our analysts, Joyce Vance and John Flannery. John, what was important about those passages?
Well, what was important is it put the lie to the public story that the public perceives, not as political obsessives. They have this story, this false story that the investigation didn't show us anything. And in fact, we have a whole series of things in chronological and significant order telling us that from the treachery of a foreign nation state involved in our election and the combine with the campaign of Mr. Trump, and then the effort to cover all of it up afterwards is a real thing, that he was not exonerated. And in fact, in several cases, based on the questions he got, he stretched out a little bit and suggested, I have the evidence here, but he didn't say that. And it was very interesting. At one point, he was asked when he was before the Intelligence Committee, so what are you suggesting would be the alternatives? And he suggested the word impeach, which clarified in a way his report didn't, that he thought the next logical step for the Congress was to impeach. And that's the issue, I think.
And Joyce, on the substance, today is also a test for America and the body politic. How do we deal with all the information coming at us? How do we deal with it being delayed? I don't think there's any doubt some of this would have been useful earlier. And for that, I'm going to play you another example. For the months that Donald Trump was saying witch hunt, Bob Mueller could have rebutted that earlier. As I mentioned, other prosecutors have rebutted in real time. It took a subpoena, because he's so by the book, to get this.
Would you agree that it was not a hoax, that the Russians were engaged in trying to impact our election?
Absolutely. That was not a hoax. The indictments we returned against the Russians, two different ones, were substantial in their scope. We have underplayed to a certain extent that aspect of our investigation that has and would have long-term damage to the United States.
Bob Mueller has never pretended to be anything other than a prosecutor. He's not a politician. He's not making a case for impeachment. He's fair. He wasn't theatrical. He told us today that he bent over backwards to present evidence that was favorable to the president. So that's what should really hit everyone tonight, is that with that commitment to fairness, he makes a remarkable case today, both on the obstruction prong and also on the threat to the country regarding Russia. We should pay attention to Mueller when he says this. It's hard to watch this full day because I think in many ways it's a long day. It's not easy watching the sausage get made. But when you show these short takes and we put them together, it's clear that Mueller in his own way is telling us this president obstructed justice. And people who obstruct justice do it because they're concerned about whether or not they're guilty. Trump may not have known whether or not he committed a collusion conspiracy with Russia, but he was scared that that might be the outcome, and he didn't want Mueller's investigators to have full access to everything. That's why they obstructed.
And you just put your finger on something that is both legal but also broadly understandable, which is if you're not guilty, why are you acting so guilty? If you're not scared, why do you look so shook? And you said it's useful to go into the hearing. We're really going to do that throughout our special hour tonight. And so the panel stays, and I'm going to bring in another special guest, a former counsel to a top congressional committee here, to dig into this, why this exchange with a Mueller fact check of Trump was so pivotal today.
So the report did not conclude that he did not commit obstruction of justice.
That is correct.
Did you actually totally exonerate the president?
No.
Does that say there was no obstruction?
No.
No. I bring in, as promised, Sophia Nelson, a regular on our show, who was relevantly counsel to a top House committee, the Oversight Committee, on the Republican side, although you have outlined many concerns with this president's conduct. When you look at that exchange, which really boils down to Bob Mueller saying no to Trump a few times, and it took a subpoena to get there, what does it mean to you?
Well, let me start with this and say it was a disappointing day for me as a Republican committee counsel to see no Republican on either committee today stand up for justice, for the Constitution, to ask probative questions, to actually inquire about facts. That's the first problem.
You're saying you don't think that the Republicans use this to do fact-finding or on the intel side deal with this profound national security questions.
Right. That was most disturbing. You can see on the Judiciary Committee, I kind of get the politics of that, but when you're dealing with intelligence and a Russian cyber attack against America, Republicans should have had as many concerns as their Democrat colleagues. But back to your question about this exchange with Chairman Nadler and Mueller, I think that what you saw today was exactly what Joyce said. Mueller's not a movie star. He's not a theatrical guy. He's not someone that's going to get us excited. He didn't want to be there today, but he answered the questions to the best of his ability, and what he said in that exchange was alarming.
Let me ask you that, because you mentioned that. I'm listening closely to you, and this has been a debate in legal circles, political circles, maybe all circles, given how big this is. When you witnessed this, and you have been through these hearings before, did you see Bob Mueller warm up over the course of the day? You say he didn't want to be there, and by the end of the day, did he decide, wait a minute, I'm here, maybe there's some things I do want to get across?
Better in the second
or do you think it was the prism? Because one view is he warmed up, simple. Yeah. The other view is, on judiciary, he was still trying to defend these very serious rules. And on intel, he's like, look, we didn't say Trump conspired. So having closed that out, what we will say is, all of this stuff was concerning and unpatriotic, and he sort of was unbridled by the rules. What do you think?
He was on two different playing fields. To your point, the Judiciary Committee is a little bit more difficult because he knows ultimately they want to go towards impeachment.
Right.
On the Intel Committee, you could tell he was much more passionate about Russia having attacked our country and that we ought to be alarmed about it and doing something about it. And I think he did feel more unconstrained, unbridled, where he could actually get into more of, some of his exchanges were unbelievable. He actually woke up. I think he definitely woke up in the second part. He took some Red Bull, probably.
Are you saying that Bob Mueller, in your view, is woke?
No, he ain't woke for sure. He tried.
Let me bring in John Flannery. That the other thing here, and we're not pulling punches one way or the other, right. which is how we try to do it.
Yes.
The other reason that the judiciary hearing was harder for Mueller was that he had more turf to try to defend and more decisions. There were Democrats who disagreed with certain things but wanted to get facts out of him. There were Republicans who raised things that, as I've reported today, actually are at least valid or potentially legitimate critiques, so that we don't know everything that the investigators know. We don't have the grand jury material. We weren't in the room. So as journalists, we're at a distance. But let me play an exchange that I know you agree with the premise of the critique, which is, why didn't they go harder and get an interview with the president? Take a look.
Right.
Why didn't you subpoena the president?
We negotiated with him for a little over a year. We were almost towards the end of our investigation, and we'd had little success in pushing to get the interview of the president.
What did you think of the president's written responses, Mr. Mueller?
It's certainly not as useful as the interview would be.
The president didn't ever claim the Fifth Amendment, did he?
I'm not going to talk to that.
I think he did something very interesting there, though. He spoke about weighing things. The expedition that he wanted to finish the investigation and what he had, suggesting he had enough for obstruction and didn't need more. And he did have that false statement in the answers. So I think that that was critically important, and it meets the issue of, Trump saying, I am not a witch, basically. And he doesn't really get away with it after this hearing. So he looks kind of foolish.
But he says here, well, we were almost towards the end of our investigation. Yes. You have argued on this show
he should go further.
You can't say whether you're at the end of the investigation if you haven't done everything possible to get the facts about the criminal intent of the individual who is being scrutinized in Volume 2 The president.
And in his testimony, he took us down the corrupt intent thing when he was asked about the three elements that were necessary, the checklist. Sir. I thought that was excellent. And even when he shaded a little bit, he was still pushed on it, I think, effectively to say it was made out.
And Joyce spoke earlier about a roadmap. You're speaking about the checklist.
And reality.
I have a news alert for everyone. It's legal. It's a little scoop, but the checklist today is the roadmap. So if you're into that kind of thing, we actually have a special report on that later in the hour. A panel stays with me. We'll come back to you. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.